here's a Scared for Real's Legacy Special.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
And 1984, hard to believe, 40 years ago. I was only 4. How old were you, Adam?
I wasn't even a thought yet.
Oh, you weren't even a twinkle in your parents' eye.
No, they hadn't even met yet.
Well, 1984, what a wonderful year for cinema. And, I mean, we could talk about the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. We could talk about all sorts of stuff, but we had to narrow it down to a few picks for each because we'd be here all day talking about 1984. I know I would anyways, because I was originally going to talk about Paris, Texas. It's not for all taste, but we'll get into all of the fun stuff of why we picked what we picked. Adam, we're going to start off with you. What is your first film? I mean, again, we had a plethora of cinema to choose, and what's your first pick, and why did you choose it?
Chris, again, this is one of our funner shows we get to do. We get to talk about multiple movies and highlight the few that we like.
Yeah.
So I kept mine, right in my favorite pocket of film genre with, on the more creepier and horror side of it. And we're going to start with 1984's, and when I say cult classic, I mean the definition of cult classic, The Toxic Avenger.
And now we were talking
Toma
about
films.
Yeah, that we were talking about like the ultimate B movies. Now this one is what I consider like a B movie. It has all of the things that I would check off for a B movie.
Literally everything. I mean, this had a budget of $500,000. It only made $800,000.
It made a little bit of money.
Made a little bit of money, but
home video, it definitely cashed in. That's for sure.
But the Toxic Avenger. For those of you who don't know, it's about Melvin Ferd, Junko the Third.
Junko,
a 98-pound weakling janitor who gets thrown into a vat of toxic waste and becomes the kick-ass superhero, the Toxic Avenger, also known as Toxie, with all the camp and just overblown blood everywhere effects that you could expect from such a low-budget horror movie, is built such a cult following. There's multiple sequels, and in fact, the remake is coming out later this year by Toma Films.
Oh, really? They revived it?
Yes. The writer and director Lloyd Hoffman is remaking his own movie.
Wow! So it's like a reboot.
Yeah,
he's rebooting his own franchise.
Yes,
interesting.
And again, Toxie, he's been everywhere. Like he even had a children's TV show at once.
Really?
Yes. You go to Creepsville online, you can find all sorts of Toxie merch, from plushy pillows to T-shirts, and this is a huge cult superhero horror icon, and what a way to kick off our list today with the Toxic Avenger. Chris, you never seen the Toxic Avenger, but
I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of it. I've seen it floating around, and actually, MVD Entertainment, Adam, if you save enough pennies.
Yep.
You can get the Toxic Avenger collection. It's an 8-disc Tox set.
Yes.
And you get 4K, Blu-ray. That means all 4 films are on 4K, and then they're on Blu-ray as well. So you get 8 discs. Tox set. That's what they call it. Now, what made you choose this movie? When you first saw this movie, how old were you? And how did you react when you first saw this?
Well, funny story. Because of my Saturday morning cartoons and seeing the Toxic Avenger TV show, the cartoon. When I saw the Toxic Avenger movie in the movie theaters, I was like, "Hey, Mom and Dad, look, I was way too young to watch this movie."
Yeah.
And it left an impression, especially when the Toxic Avenger takes one of the bad guy jocks who turned him into the Toxic Avenger, puts him on a weight bench, and then drops about 100 pounds of weight, and it crushes his head like a watermelon. That was the...
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Sounds like a movie my wife would love to watch.
Over and over again, Chris. Over and over again.
So you saw the cartoon first, the animated cartoon series, and you're like, "Mom, Dad, we got to go." So it was playing in the cinemas at the time.
No, I wasn't even born in this.
Oh, so you went to the video store.
So it was at the all
the good old days of having a video store. So you went into the video store because you saw the cartoon and like, "Oh, this is an appropriate movie."
I saw the box of Toxic Avenger and Yep.
And the movie is supposed to be geared towards your parents, so your parents can say, "Well, maybe not yet, son," but your parents obviously never got into the Toxic Avenger craze.
Well, yeah, they had no idea what they were writing.
Yeah, since the movie barely made a budget, and I know how Albany movie theaters are now, so I can just imagine that movie probably didn't make its way into Albany.
No, actually, I was just looking at the stats here. May '84, it was only released in New York.
Oh, wow, New York City.
Only
probably.
in New York City. And it wasn't until April of '86 that it got a U.S. release.
So when did the animated series come out?
This is early '90s.
Oh, okay.
Early '90s.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, interesting. So it waited 2 years. It got shelved for 2 years, and then it got released nationwide.
Yeah.
Still, your parents would have had time to watch it, but it wasn't their cup of tea.
No, they wouldn't watch anything like that. As far as they knew, they were just getting their kids another silly superhero movie, and it was silly, all right.
Well, the same thing happened to my dad. Rented The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, thinking it was a different movie, and he wanted me to watch it, and we were watching. Goes, "Oh, this is not the movie I was thinking of," but yet I was enthralled, and it sounds like you were enthralled too.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't ever venture down the sequels, unfortunately, but I mean, it's stuck. The Toxic Avenger has always stuck with me. It's just
you've seen
cool.
it. You've seen it several times.
Couple times.
Yeah. I've been in a weight room before, and just imagine having all that weight crushed on my head.
Yeah, I suggest you check it out, Chris.
Yeah, I might one of these days. Yep. Might one of these days. So Toxic Avenger, again, this is a limited edition box set. So if you're a fan of this movie like Adam, you got to grab it while you can. I know Diabolic DVD has it for less than $100. I mean, even with shipping and handling, it's still less than $100. So the first movie I'm going to talk about, 1984, was actually the Best Picture winner. I know it's a lot of times the Academy Awards. To me, it doesn't identify what my favorite movies are, but there are a handful of Best Picture winners over the Academy's 90-plus years in existence that have really enthralled me, and Amadeus was one of them. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. It's not about Mozart. Kind of is about Mozart, but it's all about Antonio Salieri, who a real-life composer, and actually this movie kind of revived some interest in his works. This is obviously a fiction, because as far as I know, I don't think those two did anything together, or there wasn't jealousy or hatred between the two.
Right.
But yeah, Mozart is portrayed as kind of like a rock star, getting drunk all the time, getting it on with groupies and all that kind of stuff. He's married.
Yeah,
and he eventually has a child. F. Murray Abraham as Salieri is just such an amazing performance. And actually, I think the filmmakers saw because Amadeus is actually a one-man play. And I believe they saw F. Murray Abraham on stage, because F. Murray Abraham is one of those actors you don't know the name, but when you see him, it's like, oh, I remember that guy. He's not in a lot of movies because he's not much of a movie actor. He's a stage guy. Mm-hmm. He loves being on the stage. And from what I understand, there was a lot of major stars that tried out for this role, and somehow they just loved F. Murray Abraham's performance, and probably budget was involved too, Yeah. But I mean, Milos Forman, he did One Flew to the Cuckoo's Nest, and he won a lot of awards for that, and same with Amadeus as well. It starts off, Salieri is committed to a psychiatric hospital, attempted suicide, and then he kind of confesses his whole story to a priest. It's interesting. I only was aware of the 2-hour and 40-minute version. That was the version everyone saw in theaters, but there's a 3-hour version.
Oh, wow.
So you've seen it at least once, right?
At least once, yeah.
And what were your thoughts when you first saw it?
Interesting. And
not probably a movie you go out and seek.
No.
And it's same here. When I actually sat down to watch it, I mainly wanted to see it because there was so much hype around the movie.
Yeah.
I think I saw it in the early 90s, the first time I saw it, and I rented it, and I didn't really have too high expectations, because it's like, classical music. I mean, I did listen to some classical music, but I was totally enthralled. I mean, just starting off with the guy slitting his wrist, it's like, whoa, that's a hell of a way to start off a movie. It took off. It had a lot of accolades, obviously Best Picture, and it won tons of awards. But the interesting thing is, years later, I was working with somebody, and they were telling me, have you seen the 3-hour version of Amadeus? I'm like, there's a 3-hour version? I mean, 2 hours and 40 minutes that's long enough for a movie. But those 20 minutes that they added were just so mind-blowing, because I don't know if you remember how much Mozart's wife hated Salieri. Mm-hmm. And they don't really show it really in the theatrical version. You see him kind of dismiss his work like that, but there was a whole several minutes that were cut where he kind of shames her. You know, he has her come over to his house, and she strips and everything in front of him, and then he forces her to leave, and literally the servant comes in and she's all naked and escorts her out in the nude. Oh. Now you can see why she hates the hell out of this guy. Yeah. It's just such an amazing movie. It brought new life to Mozart. I mean, everyone was aware of Mozart, but the soundtrack was a huge success. It sold a ton of copies, vinyl. And when it was finally available on CD, I had a copy of it on CD. A massive achievement. I mean, I could talk about it a lot longer, but I'm definitely not going to bog down the show just talking about Amadeus. It's one I really, if you haven't seen the 3-hour version yet, you got to do yourself a favor. And it was rumored that the Criterion Collection is going to be releasing this at some point, 1984, 2024. It'd be nice if it was announced this year, but again, it's just rumors until you actually see it.
Yeah.
I think Janus Films or somebody bought the rights to it, so I'm hoping they can get this thing out in time for its 40th anniversary.
All right.
So what's next for you?
One of my all-time favorite horror movies. It's going to be Friday the 13th Part 4, The Final Chapter.
Refresh my memory on the plot, because I know I've seen this multiple times.
I mean, it's the same plot as all the other ones.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they all have differences in, like, the locations. And
the cool thing about Friday the 13th Part 4, the cool thing about Part 2, 3, and 4 is they happen over the span of basically 2 weeks. Just different parts of the lake, different, and different kids.
Right.
So it's still like the basic plot of Jason, stumbling across teenagers in the woods, camping out, and him
making out,
having his way with them.
Yeah.
But this was supposed to be, the last movie, as they always say, but, money always talks.
Yeah.
But I mean, you had, a really awesome cast here of Kimberly Beck, Corey Feldman, and Crispin Glover. Of all
That's
people.
right. Crispin Glover was in that. I remember that
first,
now.
It was right before Back to the Future, and so it was one of his first roles. You had a returning Tom Savini, who hadn't done anything in the franchise since the first movie,
right? Because
this was the last one. He wanted to really let the character go, and Jason, and
but money talk
again. Money will always talk. Again, mentioned Corey Feldman. He's the first in the next 3 movies will be based around his character, even though he doesn't play the character in the next 2 movies. This is the start of the Tommy Jarvis era of Friday the 13th.
It's like an unofficial trilogy within the franchise.
Yes.
I do remember that.
I mean, it's 91 minutes of horror greatness. Mm-hmm. Made for $2.2 million, makes $33 million at the box office, so it's a hit. It has my personal favorite Jason in it. I love Kane Hodder. No disrespect. I mean, I do consider him the GOAT of Jasons, but if I had to pick a personal favorite actor, stuntman to play Jason, Ted White. He had a very real, aggressive take on Jason. Jason still ran after people in this movie. It wasn't just walk and stalk.
He's more athletic, too.
Yeah, and
not a lot of people talk about Mr. White.
Yeah, I could keep going on about this movie, but I have 3 other picks to go, plus one I want to do a really good deep dive in. So, yes.
Well, you kind of teased one, Nightmare on Elm Street, which are 2 like kind of competing franchises. Yeah. So you might as well dive into that one.
All right. So, so the next one I had is, again, another one of my all-time favorites. It's probably it is in my top 5 of all-time favorite horror movies. The original A Nightmare on Elm Street. What can you not say about the original Nightmare on Elm Street by the legendary Wes Craven, written and directed from New Line Entertainment, John Saxon, Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, Johnny Depp's very first ever movie.
Right.
Just such a unique, awesome horror movie. Made for $1.1 million, makes $57 million at the box office. A Nightmare on Elm Street speaks for itself. Such an interesting concept. It comes right in the middle of the huge slasher boom,
right,
where at the time it was a mass killer. Every movie was a mass killer with a some sort of knife. Wes Craven gives us this dream demon with razor claws,
right,
with a razor claw glove, and the fun goes from there. I mean, it's like we said a couple episodes about horror movies. Not trying to I think it was when we were talking about Night Swim, not trying to overreach, sticking to a simple concept, and not going out of their bounds, and that's exactly,
and not taking it too seriously.
Yeah.
Now, that was the thing with Nightmare on Elm Street. It was, they were just trying to figure out what they were doing with the character, so it was part satire, part horror, and it wasn't completely funny, but when going through the TV set in part 3, that was, that was when it was ultra camp. But again, it didn't take itself too serious, and I think that's part of the attraction to some of these movies over the years. And movies like The Matrix kind of lost a lot of oomph, is because they took themselves way too seriously.
Right.
It's okay to be like a cult movie, a B movie. And
yeah,
and again, we talk, what is a B movie? Low budget. I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street had a little more of a budget, but it still has all of the other B movie check marks.
Well, yeah, I mean, New Line Cinema.
It's fun.
I mean, New Line Cinema was not the New Line Cinema we know today, and this movie is what made New Line Cinema what it is today.
Exactly.
So and again, what. I could talk for hours about Robert Englund. To me, Robert Englund was our generation's Boris Karloff. This guy, so much. I mean, we only know him for Freddy Krueger because that was his most mainstream work. But you check out some of his other stuff. The guy's so versatile, so good. And
leave Phantom of the Opera out, because that's just terrible.
But I mean, still,
the movies where they weren't pushing him to try to be a star.
Yes.
Where they're force feeding all these other horror movies with him in it. It was kind of like,
yeah. But yes, a Nightmare, the original Nightmare on Elm Street, it's just a classic. It's one of the greatest of all time. Even this, I know in the horror community, the fan favorite is part 3, Dream Warriors. Nothing touches the original.
No.
And,
I haven't seen Dream Warriors, but I did see the first one.
You should watch it. It is really good.
Yeah.
For sequels, as far as sequels go, it's one of the better sequels ever made. But I mean, you can't beat the original.
You really can't. So, what is a horror movie? We actually talked about that several episodes back. And The Killing Fields, I think, qualifies as a horror movie. It's more frightening than anything Jason ever did.
Mm-hmm.
It's more shocking than anything Freddy did. And it came out in 1984. It was neck to neck with Amadeus for Best Picture that year.
Wow.
So, The Killing Fields, it's all about Cambodia in the 70s, Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge. I could go into a lot of details about that, but let's just say Pol Pot, like Stalin before him, massacred half of his people.
Yep.
So there's like 3 or 4 million that they found that were killed by Pol Pot, who lived to, I think he was almost 80 when he died. So he had to live with that.
Yeah.
But basically, it kind of shows what the Khmer Rouge did on a smaller level, but it's based on the story of Sidney Schomburg. He's a journalist for the New York Times, and Dith Pran is a Cambodian journalist, and it's about their friendship. the experiences of those two. And it was Roland Joffe's first movie. This guy had never made a movie. And talk about a massive film debut. No one really talks about Roland Joffe's The Killing Fields as being one of the greatest film debuts by a director of all time. Mm-hmm. But you have Sam Waterston. He plays Sidney Schonberg. And Hein S. Nior as Dith Pran. Now, Hein S. Nior is a doctor, and he actually survived The Killing Fields.
Oh, wow.
So this guy's a non-professional actor. He would go on to be in different movies. You know, he was in Heaven and Earth that Oliver Stone directed, My Life, Michael Keaton. He tragically got killed, brutally killed in the mid-'90s when I think he lived in L.A., but you want to talk about just that was our introduction to him, and basically you could. I don't think a professional actor could have grasped the movie as well as him, because now Sidney Schonberg, when the America ordered everyone to evacuate Cambodia, is I don't know if you know much about that history, but you know. Richard Nixon wanted the U.S. to invade Cambodia. The surprise, I think it was Christmas Eve bombing in 73, 74, something like that. And it caused a lot of problems. We had to get all of our troops, reporters, any American citizen, we had to get them out of Cambodia because of the Khmer Rouge. And so Sidney Schonberg wants to take Dith Pran and his family. They tried to get him out of there as well. They're able to get Dith Pran's wife and his family out, but they can't get him out. So Dith Pran is stuck in Cambodia, and it kind of follows the parallels of Sidney Schonberg winning these awards, and it bothers the hell out of him that his best friend is stuck over in Cambodia. Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm not going to give away the rest of the story, but you want to talk about a horror movie. This movie, it starts and it just doesn't stop. It's almost 2.5 hours long, and it's one like intense sequence after another. And the way Roland Joffe portrays it, it's just like just casually shooting all these people. You know, no big deal. The way the violence is presented, and it makes it even more shocking, and it definitely sticks in your mind. That's for sure. And The Killing Fields has had they had a DVD release. Warner Brothers released it, and it had like a couple of minor features on it. But Umbrella Entertainment in Australia, they released a DVD in March of 2010. Unfortunately, they released a Roland Joffe box set, Imprint Films over in Australia, Via Vision Entertainment. They released this awesome box set, limited edition. I was able to get my hands on it. You know, there's a couple movies my wife really likes, because Roland Joffe went on to direct The Mission with De Niro and Jeremy Irons, and then City of Joy. But he never equaled the success of The Killing Fields. The Killing Fields is his crowning masterpiece achievement. But yeah, I highly recommend it. And the screenplay itself is adapted from a Sidney Schonberg story in the New York Times Magazine called The Death and Life of Dith Pran, A Story of Cambodia. So you can probably get your hands on that somewhere. That's probably even more shocking than the movie itself. But, I mean, watching Hein S. Nior, a Killing Fields survivor, you know, just watching his reactions throughout the movie, his body language, I think that speaks for itself. So The Killing Fields, if you can get a hold of that Blu-ray somehow, it's got even more features than the American DVD had. What's next for you, Adam?
Well, I'll keep playing off your theme of, is it a horror movie? And we're going to go Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
That was that movie is never talked about as one of the best Indiana Jones movies, and I actually almost chose it myself, but I saw you picked it, and I'm like, I'm going to let Adam have this one, because I literally, my ranking of Indiana Jones goes Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and then Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and we're not going to mention the fifth movie, which is awful. But go ahead, I'll let you talk about Temple of Doom.
I agree with you. I think this is kind of the the forgotten gem of the franchise.
Right.
I mean, because listen, Last Crusade was so good. You know, sandwiched between Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is one of the greatest movies of all time.
Right.
My personal favorite movie of all time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Raiders? I would have assumed Halloween was your favorite.
No, I mean, my favorite horror movie is Halloween.
Oh,
but if I
I'm
had to,
talking about horror, every movie.
Yeah, if I had to pick an all-time favorite movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark is my favorite. And
it's an amazing movie.
yeah, so, and again, in this sequel, it's just different from the rest. Even Last Crusade kind of had the same feel, the same vibe with the Nazis, you know,
Right.
from Raiders. This went in a totally different direction. Steven Spielberg really was able to have some creativity and do some things like he really wanted to do. Like he never got like the Broadway opening and stuff like that. That was all his influence rather than George
Right.
Lucas's.
Right.
And it's just a unique movie. Harrison Ford is, you know, obviously the only one to ever be Indiana Jones. You know, rescuing a town's children from child slavery.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like it's really serious topics mixed with a bunch of science fiction, camp, and fantasy. It's just a beautifully brought together with so many different concepts.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it's, you know, I think it's Harrison Ford's best performance.
Really?
Next to Raiders of Indiana Jones.
Oh, of the Indiana. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Next to Raiders, I mean, he's great in the other movies, but you know, he kind of really owned it. You know,
He grew into the character more.
Yeah. You know, hugely successful. I mean, a $28.7 million budget. You know, $333 million. I mean, huge money, and it's Temple of Doom. It's cool.
It kicked off the summer blockbuster season back in '84. I think it came out Memorial Day weekend, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It may have come out a little bit later, but I you know, some of my observations from that is Amrish Puri, who plays Mola Ram. Okay,
Yes.
Years after that, I was watching Gandhi, and he's in Gandhi.
Yeah.
The Best Picture winner, Gandhi. Completely different performance. And it's interesting, the whole ripping the heart out things that go on in the movie. Spielberg and Lucas both happened to be going through divorces at the time.
Yeah.
Which really... And Spielberg had some happy moments because he met Kate Capshaw on there. That would become his wife. It's really cool, and if you look very closely, you'll see Dan Aykroyd in the movie.
Yes. Yep. In the very beginning.
Yeah, I think Ghostbusters was filmed around the same time, and the sets were near each other, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So that's it's interesting to hear him try to do a British accent.
Oh, Mr. Aykroyd. But yeah, I mean, the whole Indiana Jones series. Again, you know, we won't talk about the last movie. That's just.
Did you actually watch?
No, I haven't. I can't bring myself to watch it.
I don't blame you. Mads Mikkelsen is just not enough.
I mean, I can even, there's stuff even about Crystal Skull that I can defend. And everything I've heard about this new one, it's put me off, which is sad because I'm such a fan of the character, the series, Harrison Ford. I mean, I just told you, Raiders is my all-time favorite movie.
Yes.
I want to see it, but a part of me is just, I can't bring myself to watch it.
I don't blame you. And Mads Mikkelsen is the only reason to watch it, and that's not enough of a reason. It's terrible. And a red flag, if you ever have the temptation to want to watch it, Lucas and Spielberg were not involved.
No, it's the only one in the series that they did not write and direct.
Yes. So, again, if you ever get the temptation to want to watch it, just remember that, and that should answer your question.
But I mean, again,
Temple of Doom.
Back to Temple of Doom. I mean, again, and the cool thing about the Raiders movies or the Indiana Jones movies is they all kind of have a theme to them that George Lucas specifically, based off of his childhood and things that he loved in his childhood, the Saturday morning serials that he grew up watching, like Flash Gordon and The Shadow and all of them. And you can really tell with Temple of Doom, he leans into the creepier, the horror, the more, supernatural vibe, of those movies that he grew up with. So it's really cool. Like Crystal Skull obviously is, an homage to those 1950s Atomic Age.
Oh yeah, the
horror,
paranoia,
B horror movies.
The paranoia of Russia and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, but yeah, Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom, classic. One of the again, sequels are hit or miss. This hit.
Yes, it was a massive hit at the box office too.
So,
well, I got another. It's kind of a sci-fi cult classic, Repo Man. Do you remember that one?
I do remember that one.
Man. Emilio Estevez, and of course the legendary Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah,
who did this, Paris, Texas, and Red Dawn, all in 1984. All of them came out in 1984. And
Red Dawn, Wolverines.
I could not get into Red Dawn. I tried. But Repo Man, though, I guess you could call it a sci-fi dark comedy. Alex Cox, it's his first time as a director. The guy's like a B-movie historian. The guy knows pretty much everything you need to know about spaghetti westerns, cult films, and stuff like that. It's definitely a satire. That's where I think the dark comedy comes from. It kind of critiques the Reagan administration. Although, if you're watching it now, instead of Reaganomics, you could say Bidenomics, right? But yeah, there's consumerism, the atomic age. But, all that stuff aside, like Romero and all the other great sci-fi horror directors, the politics kind of bubbles underneath the surface here. And what a lot of fun this movie was to watch. I mean, some of it's so cheesy, but it's so good. It never takes itself seriously. This is what I'm talking about. When people take themselves too seriously when doing a movie of this nature, it always fails. But this was just done with there was a lot of fun involved with this film. It had obviously a troubled release because Universal Studios is the one that released it, but there's a lot of skepticism because it's like, okay, the politics involved and some of the violence and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it still received a lot of huge acclaim, but the critics literally said it was one of the best films of the year.
Yeah,
but for some reason, it just Universal didn't believe in it. I mean, it did break even at the box office, but where the movie really made its money was on home video.
Yeah.
But Cox actually re-edited the movie himself for TV. And actually, if you pick up the Criterion edition of Repo Man, they actually have the TV version on there, but it's got a lot of overdubs to, obviously the language. I guess there was a standalone sequel based on an unproduced screenplay. It was Waldo's Hawaiian Holiday. It was published as a graphic novel in 2008. And then there was Repo Chick, which was released in 2009. I never read or saw those, but this one was a lot of fun, Repo Man. I mean, it kind of falls apart at the end a little bit. It does drag a little bit, but it's just a fun ride. And, of course, the soundtrack with Iggy Pop and all that. I'm sure you love that, Adam.
Oh, yeah. I like me some Iggy Pop. I'm not going to lie. I think, Emilio Estevez, I think, is a very underrated actor. I think Charlie gets, way more credit than...
Well, I think Emilio took a little more risks. Yeah, because he started directing films in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a lot of success with that, but he tried to branch out. And, of course, he did the Mighty Ducks movies, which made him a lot of money.
First movie I ever saw.
Really? The Mighty Ducks?
In the theaters, yeah.
No kidding.
Very first movie I ever saw in the movie theater was Mighty Ducks.
Nice.
I don't know. I've always thought, I love Young Guns and I don't know. I always thought he was better than Charlie Sheen personally, his brother.
Well, he didn't get all of the big breaks that Charlie Sheen got. I mean, that was the thing. We talked about Johnny Depp with Nightmare on Elm Street. Johnny Depp really got into being a serious actor. Yeah. And he studied the Vietnamese language and all that kind of stuff for Platoon. Yeah. I don't know if you know any of this stuff.
Yeah. I've heard about it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just Oliver Stone had to cut Johnny Depp's part because he was taking away. Well, it's like if I was Oliver Stone, just have Johnny Depp in the lead. Yeah. But anyway, Repo Man is a lot of fun. Again, not for all tastes, but if you can go with sci-fi, dark comedy, satire, I mean, Repo Man involved with all sorts of futuristic weaponry and all that kind of stuff. It's definitely an interesting plot, that's for sure.
Sure. Before we go into the movies that we want to deep dive, do you have one more you want to mention? Or?
Yes, I do. Thanks for reminding me. Once Upon a Time in America, I could literally do a whole hour talking about this movie. It was Sergio Leone's final film. He kind of had like a Once Upon a Time trilogy unofficially. He had Once Upon a Time in the Revolution, which was also named Fistful of Dynamite, which was also named Duck You Sucker. That came out in 1971, right after Once Upon a Time in America, which is probably his crowning achievement. But in 1984, Once Upon a Time in America, you had Robert De Niro, James Woods starring together. It's actually based on Harry Gray's novel, The Hoods. The interesting thing is about Sergio Leone is he loved American literature. He just fell in love with American cinema. I mean, when he was filming Once Upon a Time in the West, he literally had enough of a budget to shoot certain scenes in Monument Valley. So, I mean, he loved John Ford movies, and that's been labeled unofficially as John Ford country, Monument Valley. So he would bring back the dirt and the sand, and he have fans blowing it around the sets in Italy. It chronicles the lives. We're going to get back to Once Upon a Time in America. You have the lives of two best friends, Robert De Niro, James Woods. They lead a group of Jewish ghetto youths who rise to prominence during the Great Depression. They're Jewish gangsters in New York City. There's all sorts of themes of childhood friendships, love, lust, greed, betrayal, loss, broken relationships, and, of course, the rise of the gangsters in American society. Unfortunately, it was Sergio Leone's final film, unfortunately. And there's a lot of cuts of this film. There's a lot of cuts. Now, I'm going to dig into this because apparently he had like 10 hours worth of film.
Oh, wow.
So he whittled it down to 6 hours, okay?
Only 6?
Only 6. Well, I mean, the thing is with Sergio Leone, time is doesn't play a factor when it comes to him. Time is suspended when you're watching a Sergio Leone movie. Yeah. It's literally opera.
You're right.
Most movies, you have the movie and then you have the score. He would work with Ennio Morricone to do the score before they shoot the movie, okay? So while they're filming the movie, they have the soundtrack playing on loudspeakers to get them in the mood of it, okay? So it's literally opera, but without the scales and the going back and forth. But it's operatic cinema.
Yep.
All of his movies were like that. So they had originally envisioned 2 3-hour films. That's why 6 hours. Okay, he wanted it in 2 parts.
Yep.
Then he had a 4-hour and 29-minute version, but he was convinced to shorten it to 3 hours and 49 minutes. And that's the cut that premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 1984. But then, they trimmed it down to like 3 hours and 35 minutes. And then when they distribute it with the Ladd Company in America, they shortened it down to 2 hours and 19 minutes.
Oh, wow.
They literally, what the movie does a lot of bouncing back and forth. It starts off with the adult version of the characters, then it flashes back to their childhood, and then it flashes back forward to a certain scene, and then when they're older. The movie is like, because De Niro's character is an opiate addict, so you kind of sum it up as an opium dream, maybe. It's ambiguous. The ending is ambiguous. So what they tried to do when they released it in America is they cut, the 2-hour, 18-minute cut. They put it with the kid, starting off with them as kids, moving them into middle age, and then to old age, and it was a mess.
Right.
Because he had the movie shot a certain way and edited a certain way, and they totally botched the movie. It was a huge flop. And if they actually released the 3-hour, 49-minute cut, which was at the Cannes Film Festival, the movie would have probably at least received some Oscar love for Ennio Morricone. It's probably one of his finest film scores. Mm-hmm. It's just so incredible. So, unfortunately, I saw it the first time. It was on Arts and Entertainment Channel. Remember that in cable?
Yep.
And it was in a 2-hour time slot, so it was about 100 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, De Niro. I love Sergio Leone. I thought the movie sucked, Adam.
Wow.
I was watching this I think it was 10 years old, and I said, this movie really sucks. I won't watch it again. Because I used to record stuff off of my parents' VCR and then play it back, and it's this movie sucks. What a mess of a movie. Mm. And then it was like 5 years later, going to the video store, and I see Once Upon a Time in America, and I'm like, oh, I remember that movie, but it was a two tape VHS. I'm like, what? And I look at it, and it was the 3-hour, 36-minute version. Oh my God. This is like 3.5 hour movie, and I saw an hour and 40-minute cut. So I gave it another shot.
Yeah.
And wow, it was like night and day. It was night and day. And you even see Treat Williams in it, the late great Treat Williams. He plays part of kind of a corrupt politician who uses them for muscle.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like night and day, and it was like I had never seen this before. It was just such a masterpiece, and I wish they would have showed the 3-hour, 49-minute version here in the United States. I think De Niro, he was somewhat of a box office attraction. James Woods was starting to become popular. He wouldn't hit it big until a couple years later. Salvador gave him a lot of recognition as an actor. But Joe Pesci had a small part in the movie. And it's just a movie I think that would have done a whole lot better if they actually released the 3-hour, 49-minute version. It just boggles the mind. They did release on Blu-ray several years back. It's out of print now, but they released the 4-hour, 29-minute version. The quality of film wasn't so great. I kind of held back on getting that because it was kind of, from the clips I saw online, it was very jarring. You had these beautifully remastered shots and then this really bad quality. We saw the Superman 2 Richard Donner cut, which had some oh wow moments, but it was like the footage was really bad.
Yeah.
One wonders if the 3-hour, 49-minute version actually played around the world instead of just at the Cannes Film Festival. I think the movie would have been received a whole lot better. It made more money, but for some reason, all of Leone's movies were cut whenever they got over to the United States. There was a few minutes omitted for a few dollars more. They butchered the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, cut 16 minutes out of it. The 2-hour, 45-minute version of Once Upon a Time in the West wasn't seen in America until 20-some-odd years later. They cut 25 minutes out. And again, no one wanted to see it because it was a mess. Just leave the movie alone. Leone was a perfectionist. Him and Kubrick, I think, were the ultimate perfectionists. He shot some of Once Upon a Time in America over here as well in the United States, I believe in different parts of New Jersey, but it was just a few scenes, most of it shot in Italy. But it's just a massive masterpiece, and I think the reason why they didn't want him to do the 2-part version was another De Niro movie was made, 1900, Bernardo Bertolucci movie, and it was a bomb, a movie, 5 hours and 15 minutes.
Oh my God.
And that's another one they chopped up too, but it just was not a financial success. That one's more difficult to watch than Once Upon a Time in America. I mean, there is one notable rape scene in Once Upon a Time in America, but there's more to it than just that. It still makes people shake their heads, but that's the character, you know?
Right.
And again, you got to think back, and of course, a lot of the other cuts had that out of the movie.
Right.
So there's the two characters that liked each other. You never get to understand why they drifted apart. That would do it, Adam.
I would think so.
But Once Upon a Time in America is definitely an amazing film. Unfortunately, there's no Blu-ray cut right now. I'm hoping with its 40th anniversary, we might get surprised later this year. What was your favorite film from 1984? Was it a horror movie? Was it a cult classic? Was it a sci-fi? Gosh, we didn't even get into the Terminator or any of those other movies that came out, those big blockbusters. There's a lot of other great films from 1984. Comment on our YouTube channel. Send us messages through our social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Just reach out, let us know what you think, and give us some feedback or requests too.